Berarti saya maaf dalam teks bahasa itu saya edit 2 kali belum puas hati. Jadi kita lanjutkan pemberitaan yang akan diikuti dengan dalam bahasa Mandarin dan juga Tamil. Jadi pada hari ini kita gunakan skrip. Skrip ini jadi itulah permulaannya. Jadi akronim dalam bahasa yang saya lebih tepat untuk menjelaskan beberapa konsep. Asas adalah madani. Nanti kita akan jelaskan itu kemudian. Now, I envision the idea of script after upon reflection, years of devouring books, particularly when I was given this forced arrest, thousands of articles, then continue my journey, talking to fishermen, farmers, settlers, then the intellectuals, there's experts, and expanding to the international arena. Again, speaking to various expertise, or personalities with expertise. One issue that was not initially familiar to me, like climate change or digitalization. And so I thought, given the situation, the complexities, I benefited immensely from the ideas of so many of us. Experts, I mean, all are experts. I mean, fishermen is an expert in his field. Yeah, remember this great story of Nawi by the Rooney when he was traveling with his boat and he was boasting about his knowledge. He's an expert in languages, expertise. So academics and intellectuals here bear with me this story. It's a very strong moral message. He was boasting to this poor boy about how important is knowledge, how important is the understanding and reading the classics and having a more sophisticated understanding of the complexities of the world. And he was then criticizing this book for not knowing much, or not knowing anything. Then they went through. The bookman felt very depressed, very upset. He was, to an extent, even abused, not necessarily demonized, but insulted for his lack of knowledge. But they then, in the journey, faced this not really turbulent waters, but then they were pulled by the tide into the whirlpool, and there's no way of saving them. So the poor boatman asked this scholar, professor, academic, do you know how to swim? And he said, no, I know everything else, but not how to swim. Good luck to you. That's the end of the story. The message is proper. There really is some humility, and I want to start by telling you this anecdote to show that I learned from so many of you, the leadership of Pakatan, Keadilan, intellectuals, Majlis professor here, because it is through this sort of engagement, series of reasoned discourse, and talking to various people that I then decided to craft what I call script, based on values, ethics, what is sustainability, a different definition. Please don't assume that sustainability, to my mind, is the same as the conventional understanding of sustainability, or care, compassion, or respect, or innovation, and progress, prosperity, and finally trust.
You wrote in the introduction perception that for decades, government after government has proposed reform and change, draining the meaning from these words. Even the word new has been debated. Datuk Seri, what is new about this script?
The anti-corruption drive, reform, transformation become popular slogans devoid of meaning, because those who claim to understand or propagate do not actually mean it. They may understand, but they're not committed, and that therefore it's not new. So I'm not suggesting something necessarily new. Of course, the definition, the way I interpret it, may be quite different. I don't claim to have original idea. I'm not a great thinker or a sage. But what is new is the attempt to synthesize all these concepts based on values, very important to the Malay society, to the Malaysian society. When I mentioned the word humility, it's very much in our Asian tradition. When I talk about care, compassion, it's very much in the probably one of the first major hadith or tradition of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yarhamu man fil ard, yarhamkum man fis sama. You love, show compassion of those on earth, human beings, Muslims, non-Muslims, human beings, the animal kingdom, the jungle, the trees, and the earth. Then those in the heavens will shower compassion to you. And this is very much Confucianist in a way. Very much even in the philosophy of what we say, a balance, an equilibrium in the society, the Chung Yu in the Chinese philosophy, or the Golden Mean in the Western, and Ummatan Wasata, the society that maintains balance and equilibrium. So when you talk about values such as trust, which is in the deficit now, or compassion, which is also terribly lacking, because you talk about compassion to one race, to one tribe, to one region, but not compassion to humanity. No humane interest, both in the economy and society. So I try to remind Malaysians that if you want to talk about our future as Malays, as Malaysians, then we must transcend these silos, this thinking in terms of tribes, into a broader understanding what cherished values are.
Well, coming to that, this is something that's been in my mind. So, since the budget is around the corner, would you say, or is this a manifesto? Why not?
This is not a manifesto. This is not alternative budget for sure.
All right, that's the question. Yes.
It is coincident. The time is at present to me. As I've said before, Professor Jeffrey Williams is here. Why do you talk about budget in educations? You should talk about governance and avoiding absconding funds. He said something very pertinent, very courageous, that we all know that the Ministry of Education and particularly health require more funds. But he said, I'm not going to support one additional ringgit without transparency and governance, because otherwise these funds will be stolen. So to my mind, it's not relevant to discuss budget now. It is better, but right to discuss what values are we talking about. Governance, anti-corruption, justice, humanity, which is in the scope, this vision of school. Of course, because is it philosophical or theoretical? Yes. But it is also policy framework. Because values can be very general. In terms of people will talk about, I can hear that many leaders talk about Maqasid Sharia, which is the high objective of the Sharia, including the crooks, the scoundrels, the robbers. They give this sort of impression that what we do is consistent with the ultimate objective of the Sharia, or anti-corruption, or governance. But to my mind, therefore, a philosophical, theoretical framework is necessary, but it must be translated into proper policy framework, and then action plan. But if you commit yourself to implement policies or introduce specific programs without this broad philosophical framework, we will fail. We have continued to fail. For the last few decades, we seem to be floating and dragging and wondering what is it for us as a country, us as Malaysians, whether we want to venture into these new programs, huge educations. I refer here to the need for AI and digitalization, yes. And therefore, some forces in the government are pushing hard on 5G. I'm not rejecting that as a matter principle. But where is the transparency? Do you need 4G? Do you need 5G? In 6 months, will we have 6G? So this has got to be discussed. Otherwise, the main motive is how you can abscond and squander billions in the name of so-called new technology. That's my concern. Therefore, issue of values and philosophical construct transcend these narrow, specific programs, particularly when it is not well articulated and not transparent.
And we firmly believe that if we do all this, and we will have a better nation tomorrow, day after tomorrow.
Well, inshallah, I will ask my friends, and this is what choice do we have. Are we in a state of despair, disillusionment, and hopelessness? Then nothing will happen, and we allow racist and religious bigots and the corrupt elements to dictate our policies? Or we will have the courage of conviction, the tenacity to say, enough is enough, let us not move. This, I'm not giving this solution to all the complex problems, but the fact that it is complex, requires complex solutions and participation by everyone. So what I'm trying to do is to allow for this narrative to continue, the conversation to continue. Please read, criticize, offer new ideas, but let us not be deflected from the central theme that we have to talk about humanity, about values. Yes, there are integral elements in our society about national language, about Islam as the religion federation, or the system, constitutional monarchy, rule of rulers. These are non-issues. We accept them. But what is pertinent, where we have failed miserably, is the failure to enhance the quality of life of our normal citizens. So I'm inviting Malaysians. After all, most of the ideas are Malaysian ideas from ordinary Malaysians too, other than the experts and the economists and the scholars here. And I want therefore to throw back to them, let us now continue these conversations. debate and discuss, but with the intention to change, to affect change in our society. Because without change and making some minor adjustments here and there, one or two new personalities, one or two new coalitions, one or two new parties is not the solution. The solution must be back to core ideas and values that we as Malaysians must promote.
I'm going to quote something. I'm going to read out a quote that you had written. The key to progress and prosperity lies not in satisfaction with what we have already achieved, but in a firm determination to make even greater efforts in the future. Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra, First Malaysia Plan 1965. How does this apply currently and in relation to your ideas and script?
See this, thank you, what page?
It's an introduction, page 11.
Fantastic. You see, I used to push quote, and incidentally, Datuk, who is a father, independent father of Malaysia, as a young man in the university, was one of those who were quite critical of Datuk's policies and even led demonstrations against him. But notwithstanding that, what he initially did, and his vision for this country, is still relevant. Now, well, that's why I said it's not necessarily new, but a new effort at this renewal, because our life will be more meaningful. We have the propensity to change. And again, those who are familiar with the sociological theory of change would know that when you talk about propensity to change or resistance to change, it's not necessarily the poor, the uneducated are resistant. Many of the political elite, bureaucratic elite, are also resistant to change, particularly when it affects their own interests. So when I use this quote, I want to emphasize the need for additional effort to affect reform. Islah must start doing our level best to try and reform, not merely as a theoretical construct, but to believe in that mission. The only other quote from a senior leading politician from Siang initially. But where it is really consistent with this call for reform. You can imagine a father of the country looks ahead that this country must not stagnate, must renew and change. I use in my probably discussion in politics to remind of this great independence speech by Jawaharlal Nehru, Trees with Destiny. A beautifully crafted speech, rare, talking about the future. It's a tryst with destiny. But finally, after decades, the second generation would then critically evaluate whether it is done, and it's our duty to then return to the original vision and participate in this reform agenda.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What is the process behind script? How do you think politicians and policymakers can activate, enact a plan, and bring it to the end, to the fulfillment of what has been written?
I'll be surprised if Jasmine does not ask difficult questions. Now, as I said, a script is formulated after decades of reflection. As I said, I will reiterate, through reading, through discussions, learning from our friends, and learning from the ordinary men and women. Now, it's fair to have philosophical, theoretical construct, but how do then, in our society, craft a program of action? Now, some of it I hear, right? But more important is to realize, because there are fields in education, in bureaucracy, in business, in governance, in politics. This capacity to undertake meaningful reform and to affect change must be desired by Malaysians, regardless of their political affiliations or religious denominations or cultural, racial differences. There are certain core values that we have to adopt, because otherwise, like what we talk about elections, just for elections, about changing players, and sometimes between a lesser corrupt to a more corrupt, or from a more corrupt to a lesser corrupt. So the value, this integral part, is to say a change is and reform is only meaningful or relevant when you reject these excesses. Okay? And to make them understand too, as most of us feel, that it is not at the cost of challenging major or core constitutional framework or agreement. That's why I took pains to explain, look, change does not mean you are changing the fabric of the nation. Change does not mean that you're going to change the language policy, for example, because this has fear among some others. So change is on the basis of values, of fairness, of humanity. People talk about sustainability, and many so-called economics would say that its growth is GDP, but we see sustainability is finally what is it for the ordinary rakyat too? How is it you say you want to progress, at the same time you cause facade, destruction of the environment? So climate change has become very relevant in the way we construct things. So, and it is that synthesis that's important. There is no sustainability, there is no compassion or justice. There is no sustainability, there is no respect for not only filial piety, in the sense, Confucianist concept of respect the others, but also recognizing the capacity of the young, of the youth, who could be immensely useful if they are given their exposure and freedom to express themselves. Professors are here, you know, we talk about Undi 18, encouraging the young to vote. You vote with understanding. You vote with adequate knowledge. You vote with the conviction to affect change. But you are not allowed to discuss freely in universities. So there is a deficit, either trust or understanding of values. Even with the limitations, during my time as a student, we have these great economic debates. We, our generation, came in without necessarily understanding about the vision of this country or what is sustainability, but the university allowed, including the then Vice Chancellor, Aziz, and encouraged debates on rural poverty, kemiskinan luar bandar, and language policy or education or health, because you are looking at disparity between those in the urban areas and the rural areas. Then there was this great economic debates where you have people from the government, from the opposition, and student leaders going and engaged in a vibrant debate. This will excite the young to thinking and reflect. Then when they decide, and they decide based on sound from understanding. But now, no, you disallow this. So compared to the late 60s or 70s, you are actually not progressing. A retrogression. And this is to my mind unacceptable. So I'm saying this, if you want us, Malays, Chinese, Indians, Ibans, Kadazan, to mature, you must allow them to reflect, think critically, not as Machais, but as thinkers.
Not as Machais. Okay. Why these 6 values: sustainability, care and compassion, respect, innovation, prosperity, and trust? Why these 6? Just the 6?
Well, we can have 60. But I thought that these 6 would cover and encompass the entire process of change and human development. And but more important, it's not 6. It's just if you synthesize the 6, it becomes 1. It is about responsibility and we get values, about compassion, respect. You know, it's very much interconnected. Because to my mind, again, sustainability cannot be a rigid economic concept, devoid of the humane angle or aspect, or care, compassion, or respect for mankind. You know, in the hadith. It is interesting, Sheikh Ghazali is here, authority in the subject, but it is not a coincidence that one of the first major hadith is on respect and compassion. It's not on da'wah, it's not on faith, it's on compassion. Because you do things in this more complex society because there is this notion of caring and compassion. You don't demonize other cultures or discriminate because it runs contrary to human values. You talk about justice because that's what human beings are supposed to do. You want to protect the environment because there is compassion. Compassion is beyond what we understand as just caring for your children and giving contracts and shares only to them. That's the problem. Yeah.
Well, since we've heard your ideas, tell us what happens next. Where do we go from here?
Well, when I was young, I said, what happened next? It's okay, Sarah. What will happen? But you know, that's not too responsible in the sense that you must be guided by this vision or mission. What happens next is to encourage Malaysians, all walks of life, to come in and start thinking, reflecting about their future. That's where this script, though it talks about the contemporary challenges, we also encourage people to relate to the future. Because my father's generation saw flooding once a year. The present generation probably 3 times a year. How can we be assured with the present thinking or doing the same thing, not doing something more elaborate and integrating these policies, that there will not be 10 times of flooding in the next generation, during the next generation. So these are issues that we need to discuss. We have never discussed or confronted with the issue of climate change as adversely as we have now. So this comes into equation. So what do we do? The thinking element of society, the farmers, the fishermen, the students must then be encouraged to participate in this national narrative about what is their future. Not just what party you to support and when is going to be the elections. Well, it may be important to some people without even talking about for what. You talk election for what? Or you want to win to do what? I mean, these to me are more fundamental questions. Otherwise, democracy will be rendered meaningless. It will be just the concert of the rich and the famous. That is why there is that resistance, a strong resistance from those political elite to allow for a vibrant discourse or reasoned discourse, and to allow the general public or students to participate in these discussions or narrative or debate. So my intention here, not restricted to your political strategy program, is to encourage people to discuss. You may choose to agree or disagree, or you think it may be too philosophical, too theoretical, or develop action plan. Do so, because my only advantage is probably to be able to spend so long, rarely listen political leader has that rare advantage, thanks to Mahathir Najib, to be able to sit down in this solitary confinement cell and to be able to devour books more than an ordinary professor. Not because I'm smart, because I have nothing else to do. But that has benefited me immensely because I have this added advantage to read, and then with that I can engage with this top-notch scholars from climate change with Al Gore, for example, to Islamic issues from this Institute of Islamic Thought, including the late Marhum Ismail Fawqi and Yusuf Al-Rawi. That's the added advantage. I always say, Alhamdulillah, but fight we must.
Actually, Datuk, I have more questions to ask you, but I think we have a time issue here. So I'm going to finish off with the last one. Script. The T stands for trust. Trust is to be earned. Tell us how you see the word trust here.
The Malay term, or the Arabic amana, is probably stronger, okay? Because it is trust, and trust is given to those, amana given to those ahli, who are basically not only qualified but competent in their field. Amana is your right, must be earned based on the core values. How do you then allow or elect someone without that? Nobody should understand it, but will be proven to be blatantly corrupt or unjust. So we have to remind them, therefore, trust to me is quite fundamental, because because there is generally a trust deficit. People say, well, nobody can trust politicians now. I don't like it when they generalize. Okay? All politicians can be trusted. So there is a growing disillusionment against political leadership. But your trust is it is meant for all those who have responsibility, who must be accountable for what they do. So trust here, even into the system. For example, capitalism. There's a lot of issues, questions raised about our belief in that system, which for decades is thought to be the ideal economic system. So I was very happy when I say this. With a great critique of the capitalist excesses, so political capitalism. But essentially, education. Do we say that there is the trust that the system can enhance the quality of education? Okay, it means well, democratization of access to quality education. 2 nights ago, I gave this speech to about 5,000-10,000 academics and students in Kerala, Calicut. We talk about democratization of access to education. But do you mean that there is real democratization? That you allow people, every single citizen, to have access to education? The second question, if you do have that, do you then give them that opportunity to have quality education? That's why this whole debate about meritocracy now is back in the forefront. Because you talk about meritocracy among the chosen elites. But you discard the vast majority, either minority or marginalized or the poor, urban poor, those in the rural heartland. So there is deficit in most of the key concepts that we have. Budget. Do you usually trust the budget? No. Yeah, because they can review every 3 months, and the budget is not for the country, but just how you can manipulate to mislead and convince people, innocent ones, to support them in the elections. So that's essentially what I mean by amanah. Amanah is trust, yes, but based on those who cherish some core values in the society. And Malaysia cannot survive, can merely survive yet, but cannot excel and enhance, be further enhanced, without that clinging to some core principles and values, which is part of the human endeavor.
Thank you, Datuk Seri. Thank you very much. We are opening the floor for Q&A from the press. Would appreciate if we focus on script.
No question, thank you.
Anyone from the press?
No, not necessary press.
Yeah, it's not necessary press. Anyone? Yes, please.
Yeah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My question is very simple. As we all know that the economic crisis is very serious currently at the moment. Our currency now is facing a very turmoil, and we currently need a serious attention from the government we have seen the government is failed to address this crisis. So now we are having a serious problem on employment, jobs, and also how we can build back the people from poverty from last 2 years. So because it's a very serious government at the moment. People who are earning now is not even enough to feed their families. So how the government today, and let's say when you become the Prime Minister, how are we going to solve this problem? It should be a need-based policy or risk-based policy. Have you seen this Tun Razak, the economic policy that he started? Today, we have seen the policies fail. Why is policy fail? Who is the cause of that fail? What are the obstacles we are facing right now in order to come back as a multiple challenge? Today we see our budget is very seriously deficit because we doesn't even have enough to top up the leakages from the procurement itself. There is no transparency at all how we can overcome these obstacles. It's a very serious issue. It's not an issue about one race, it's about all Malaysians. That's the reason why I am saying that you need to come back as a Prime Minister to save the country.
I didn't ask him to ask a question, right? I didn't. But thank you very much. I mean, you see, we are talking a very complex situation. In this script, I talk about complexity, contradictions, chaos. So you have to first start facts, admitting that we have a problem. But here we have these leaders, Prime Minister, a very nice man, and Minister of Finance, very rich man, who would repeatedly assert a notion that there is no problem. Oh, the ringgit has fallen. Well, nothing much, it's not as bad as the pound or the yuan. I mean, when you have a leader given that responsibility and is dismissed, we have a problem. And the problem is compounded because the problem is largely ignored. If you start by acknowledging, yes, we have a problem. It's not only the ringgit, it's the confidence, it's the poverty, growing poverty, growing inequality, climate issues, migration issues, unemployment. You have to start by acknowledging, yes, there are problems. Thank you very much. And you say, when I take over, not if you say, if you take over. Very smart. I would say this, and we have to sit down. First we acknowledge, my friends, Malaysians, let us accept the fact, employment is this much, poverty is increased, inequality has been again increased. And we have a problem of trust deficit. We have a problem of confidence. No new foreign investments. Domestic investments is also declining. Now you accept that and get the best in our society, the best grade, and let us work together to resolve it. Over there, part solution. After all, I have some limited experience as finance minister. Quite raw, 8 years. Yeah. So when you have this sort of crisis, you immediately call, you create the impression, and you tell the public, we have a problem. You can't go and dismiss. As it is today, there is no problem. We have graduates unemployed. We have non-graduate, school leavers unemployed. There are more school leavers after Form 3 now than ever before. You talk about Tun Razak's plan. I would say probably that was a dictate, a necessity at that time. I supported the new economic policy. I don't mean so. I'm not apologetic, but it was a demand of the time. And what is the success? It's a partial success. It's the social mobility. You can find a group, a component of the poorer students, either in University of Malaya or UiTM, having that opportunity. Fair. But what's the failure? The failure is the abuse of the policy. You enrich the core political elite, your children, your families. Most of all, I think almost without exception, all key important leaders in this country, prime ministers, minister of finance, ministers, all have enriched themselves beyond what is considered to be reasonable. They have absconded from the country. This has to stop. And all in the name of the new economic policy. Of course, some of my friends say, well, these are excesses, Anwar. You should not oppose the policy. But mind you, it's half a decade, half a century. Do you consider that as a holy book that you can't review? We have umpteen researchers making assessments. And more so, with the extent the majority of the general public and the majority of a nation, we have to make sure that we embrace the entire population and not to allow them to feel that a segment of the population is discriminated. This is a Malay government. We must have not only Malay Prime Minister but from a Malay political party. I mean, these are obsolete ideas. We should say this is a Malaysian government, that we should elect very competent people. If you were required to be a Malay Prime Minister, then you must have a competent, incorruptible Malay Prime Minister, not just a racial issue. And this is the problem in our exchanges, in our conversations. We neglect the issue of values. So to conclude, I would say this, that we should start acknowledging the flaws of the policy or the stark realities you are facing today. Then we should engage in these sort of conversations and discussions with those who are competent to deal with it. But to my mind, personally, although I acknowledge the issue of affirmative action, but it must be need-based. Alright? Majority of the Malays and Bumi Putra will benefit. Fair, I will defend that policy. Yes, if you continue with affirmative action policies, the majority of the Bumi Putra, the Malays, would benefit because they come under that category. But you do not then invariably, as is perceived, discriminate the Indians or the ethnic Chinese for no reason. That's one. Number two, this policy of giving so-called contracts to friends and families. I don't understand how a sheikh with the big turban can tolerate this nonsense. Or an academic talking about policies and principles can condone this excesses and corruption. That is the danger of a race-based, because you then reject ethics and values. And interesting enough, again, if I'm permitted just to say this, we talk about Islam here. There's a greater awareness. I mean, the mere fact that the ideals of Islam, from Hijrah, for example, is to reject tribalism, communalism, which is part of the Jahiliyyah component, error of ignorance, to replace with an ummatic concept based on justice and the rule of law. And here, we keep on harping about religious values, and we condone the excesses that we are supposed to condemn during the era of ignorance. So again, these conversations have to continue. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Do we have question number 2?
Assalamualaikum. Professor Satya from Forum Economy Malaysia I. Thank you for this opportunity. As an academic, the narrative of script certainly appeals to me. And for script for a better Malaysia to be realized, you have to be Prime Minister and you have to win the election. Now, the challenge, I feel that, and even talking with Dr. Mujahid just now, how do we make, one, there is the problem like you mentioned about the political elites, the resistance from them, who prevent the vibrant discourse to be in universities and when they're young. And so we have a sizable youth, Undi 18, who may not be aware of the whole thing. And so I think PH has got a big challenge about, even though you probably carry the right thing, but not many people see it. And so I would like to ask Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, what is your strategy on winning the election? First of all, are you hopeful this time to win the election, to make it again? And what is your strategy to make the narrative simpler for the ordinary people? Thank you.
Thank you, God. Fortunately, we don't have too many professors like this. But thank you very much. First, I know your involvement in humane economy manusiawi. Again, it's not new, but it needs to be revived and to further explore and disseminate. You know, I have often used Sudat Moko's dimensi manusiawi dalam pembangunan, the humane or human dimension in development. Because sometimes you talk about development devoid of that component. Now the challenge now is how do you win the elections? Because when you talk about governance, anti-corruption drive, climate change policy, it will require the establishment, the ruling elite, to uphold these core values and principles. It is a major challenge, I accept. When you use the forum in Parliament to talk about global financial integrity report, where hundreds of billions have been absconded overseas, then the Panama Papers, then recently Pandora Papers. I asked a question to the Prime Minister. Finally, he said, yes, we will investigate. But nothing has happened since. But you know what? Once you start saying this, the entire corrupt establishment will stop you at all costs. The issue is, the challenge for Malaysians and our students and general thinking element of society is, who decides the future of this country? The powerful, rich, corrupt establishment or the rakyat? And I say this with strong conviction. There is time that the rakyat bangkit and speak up and challenge this issue. How do we do it? Script is not the only solution, but say is the role of all of us, thinking elements, from political leaders to the fishermen, from the urban settlers to the rural heartland. It is not easy. People of us, some of us are senior politicians have been fighting for decades. This is a challenging task, but it is not unsurmountable. We have seen throughout history. I'm a student of history, not economics so much. Aslam is here. But there are times throughout history where people with ideas and conviction in this battle or juxtaposition will ultimately survive and win. You have seen this struggle against imperialism, the colonial masters in the past. So, to me, we should never lose hope. But we should not simplify or assume is going to be a simple exercise. No, it's going to be a rough battle. And I regrettably, not so much for me, but for Aziza, the children and friends, suffered too. But I don't think it has affected my resolve, my spirit. And I believe many of us have greater resolve, commitment to this. My appeal to this group is to understand that it's just not a matter of just winning elections, but making sure that these ideals about reform, about script, that should be the winner. Because when we're winning elections, then we have seen even our limited experience in the 22 months. Yes, there was some semblance of success, but it is unfortunate because the ideals of reform was not there. Those entrusted with authority, particularly the then Prime Minister, was not committed to this. So finally, it is about a political power. So we cannot repeat that. People must give us the chance to affect this change for the sake of this country. Because Malaysia, with all the limitations in the 1990s, was far superior than what it is now. You ask me as Minister of Finance or Deputy Prime Minister, do I think that was the idea? No. We have so many limitations. When the World Bank came out with this report, East Asian Economic Miracle, in front of James Wolfenson, whom I hosted this huge lunch in Kuala Lumpur. I said, thank you very much, James. You have published an excellent report. Geoffrey, you should listen to this, because people assume that as chairman of the Development Committee of the IMF, the World Bank, I would just be full of praise for Jim Wolfenson. But no, publicly I said, my concern, Jim, to the World Bank President, is that this sort of report will result in us being lulled into complacency. When we had, even at that time, with impressive growth, 9-10%, and under my stewardship of the economy, there was surplus. I made sure that we reserve some fund, learning from Nabi Allah Yusuf alayhi salam from the Quran, or Joseph the Bible, 7 fat years, 7 lean years. But I did say, in front of the World Bank President, as chairman of the Development Committee of the World Bank and the IMF, what did I say? We have a problem. We still have to grapple problems of poverty. Yes, China has successful 300 million of poverty, and Malaysia, we will others. But there were still people who are poor, abject poverty. There is growing inequality. There was even a major problem of corruption. Friends, I'm saying this because people assume that our thinking is the new thinking. No, I said that when I was Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. We have to grapple with the problem of corruption. So this report is East Asian Economic Miracle. Dia kata ekonomi yang menakjubkan, ataupun di Indonesia disebut mukjizat ekonomi lagi parah. Can be misleading. So, but with all the limitations that present, we are now rotten to the core. People have lost hope in this age of despair. People don't see political leaders giving this sort of solution. But if you ask me, is it going to be a repeat of 1990s? No. There were relative success, but we must go beyond that. Because corruption was somewhat tolerated among the cronies. The leaders enriched their children and their family members. This cannot be tolerated under this present understanding of what values, ethics, and script is all about.
we have just about enough time. So, okay, last one.
I'll give a short answer.
Then, okay. Okay.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang berhormat, my friend, Seri Ibrahim, my classmate. I must congratulate you. Kudos for coming up with a script which is appropriate for someone who has a passion for the future. And to be a Prime Minister, you have to have a passion. Now, I think you advocate very clearly for the need for change. That change is one of which is a paradigm shift in the way that we think. We cannot be thinking in the old way that we have been thinking since independence until now. It's obvious that the vicious cycle is going on very strongly over the years. It has not changed. Now, you need to do something if you want to be the Prime Minister, which I hope you will. You need to replace it, of course, with a virtuous cycle, which is more constructive, more positive, and what we need in the country. Now, as you know, change is multi-dimensional in nature, just like development, multi-dimensional. There are many dimensions. I, as a person who has done my research about 30 years ago on development, I think a lot of people fail to understand about the multi-dimensional nature of development. Change requires development. But you cannot be doing everything. You have a lot of challenges because anyone who helps the country in the future has a very difficult task, has a very complex task, as you put it. Now, there is a need for us to identify what are the dimensions of development that are very critical for the country. And we cannot be doing or repeating the same process that we have done over the years, which has not led to a proper virtuous cycle, but has led to a vicious cycle of development. Now, there is a need to also understand that development, the various dimensions of development are not equal in weightage. What I fail to see is a philosophy of proper development for the country. Even in the 5-year Malaysia development plan, I don't see that prevailing to constitute as the fundamental purpose, the fundamental philosophy of which our development is to be driven by, which will include, as you say, the vital core values, the core that we need to be the basis of how we carry out development. But more important, I think, these days, a lot of people tend to treat all the dimensions of development, economic, social, political, as equal. They are not equal. A weightage must be determined through a proper opinion by the various experts. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, the family chairman of the Development Bank, so he has some exposure and understanding. But I agree about the national index, or even I used sustainable economic development assessment, which is encompassing. But the problem with slogans like this, Jana, is that people use without necessarily understanding or willing to act upon it. You know, we have education. I remember McKinsey's report. When the government spends hundreds of millions ringgit just to give varying reports, employing all these so-called international experts, spending hundreds of millions ringgit in these reports, for these reports. Education, I remember, even studying the case of Pahang. In the economic planning unit, the 5-year plan, annual plan, but they use systems, like you mentioned, paradigm shift. It's not Thomas Kuhn's paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift, some changes here and there, that's it. It's not paradigm shift. The thinking remains the same. And that is essentially our problem. Now, I don't spend millions for the script. I mean, this but of course, it's more a small attempt, a small engagement to show that now let us then encourage these sort of conversations. You know, so I fully share with you, gentlemen. Enough of consultants giving this report. Why do you call it all the reports? And you see some brilliant ideas are there, not necessarily relevant to our society, because they're all international experts. I think we have enough capacity in this country. We can benefit. I mean, I can't deny that I learned from experience of many countries, many scholars, many friends internationally too. But what I'm saying is, we have the expertise. But slogans will be rather meaningless if you do not actually expound it in a way that is relevant to society and have this commitment to implement. How many national plans do we have? We have now a major problem, food crisis. How many plans did we have about national food sufficiency, self-sufficiency in every field? But what have we done in the last 10, 15, 20 years? I'm not saying that nothing was done, but the problem had exacerbated somehow. The import has doubled from what, food imports have doubled from the last 10 years. And this has, as I said, exacerbated because there was inaction. I believe we have very comprehensive report in dealing with these issues, food security, but it has become a major complex issue now because of inaction or poor governance, or, in the case of food substitute. I find one ex-minister of finance saying this is a new national policy, when going to every state, meeting the Menteri Besar and asking for land for himself. Yes, and when asked, this is national food security plan, my fault. So this thing, that's why I say, it must be related to clear policies, to issue of values and governance on what we mean by sustainability and care, compassion. How do we have compassion? When this poor guy in the village cannot get 1 acre or half acre for his house and for small garden or food, vegetable plantation, vegetable hedge. And this guy, a multi-billionaire, would be given land because he was influential. And at that particular time, happened to be an economic advisor. I mean, he's an economic miser. So Zana, I mean, thank you very much. But I think, therefore, it's a clear policy, is well researched, but an action program based on this theoretical framework and the core values which we put it as under a philosophical construct. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Seri, if you would be very kind to sign this book for me. Can you read it? Okay, can you read it?
They should have a box outside so that we can donate a bit so that I can use the funds to print more copies.